All right, everyone. It's nice that there's at least one massively wealthy person who I think at this point he says, I got enough wealth and stuff that I'm pretty much untouchable here. I'm actually allowed to weigh in with real opinions on real issues, which is something that a lot of the multi-billionaire class doesn't do. Basically, it leaves you with Musk and Trump and a handful of others that are kind of telling it how it is, and everyone else is just trying to screw you and globalize the world more and upend civilization itself. Link in the description. Archived, of course. Musk saying that the Biden border crisis, which is what it is intentional. I happen to agree, although I don't fully agree with the singular and reductionist sort of explanation he gives. Musk says that it's all to create more Democratic voters. And indeed, if you look at some of the left-wing think tanks over the last decade, they have released statements and reports saying, well, look, the only way the Democratic Party is going to remain dominant is, and neocons to an extent, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, two-party system aside, is to import a bunch of people that are amenable to those policies. So we got to get the balance right. You know, there's too many populists now, and the libertarian thing's getting more popular. We got to do something about this because we got to keep those proles in line. That's definitely part of it. But it's small batch creation of new citizens that they have in mind. The bulk of individuals are not meant to ever be given amnesty. To be clear, when Joe Biden and the Democrats come out and say, well, we want a path to citizenship for these people, have they not been saying that for 20 years? Has it ever happened? Has there ever been a significant push to try to cause that to occur? No. You get the DREAM Act, which is clearly unlawful. It was clearly lawful for Trump to cast an executive order to get rid of it since it came about to exist because of executive order, but he still got somehow shot down by the courts as though he didn't have the ability to use executive privilege to countermand executive privilege. It's an interesting case. Supreme Court is very hit or miss over the last 20 years or so as well. That's only one part of it, though. The other part is that they want slaves, and the Republicans don't really stand in the way of the mass migration by and large because they want them to. Their corporate buddies want cheap labor that they can exploit. There are sweatshops and shit all over the United States. There's infrastructure that's created as gig work by people who are not legally in the country, or people who are at least not full-on citizens and currently have no path towards full citizenship. They're basically in don't deport them status. Now we've got the new mythology that the horde of people showing up is mainly asylum seekers. This is their new bottom line. Well, they're just seeking asylum. They're legally do that right. Yeah, absolutely. Until recently, it was understood that they had to come in through a proper port of entry and then wait there over in Mexico, and then they could be processed. Now we've got the catch and release system like under Obama back in full force, but it doesn't really matter because you don't even apprehend most of the people crossing. When we look at the data with regards to illegal immigration, you got to understand that's a lowball figure, by the way. The number of apprehensions does not represent the number of people actually coming in, because a lot of those people come across and they disappear. And apparently now, because Texas is actually actively trying to guard its border, Eagle Pass is not having as many problems now because the feds have been shoved aside by the Texas State Guard and by various militias. Now they're going a little bit further west. They got the memo and now they go through Arizona or California. Of course, if they come through California, they'll be welcomed with open arms. Just not if they try to settle in Bel Air or Hollywood Hills or something like that. If they go to, inner Los Angeles or something like that, or outer San Diego, clamber around in some urban ghetto or something, that's perfectly fine. Just not in my backyard. Not in my neighborhood. No, here we have private security and shit like that, so watch out. You saw that. Remember when people were protesting during the BLM riots? You remember that? When they were in LA? And they were burning and looting and doing crazy shit, how nothing was effectively done. The LAPD was effectively ordered to stand down even though they were destroying property and assaulting people. You remember that picture where the sheriffs and shit were drawn up like a goddamn army when they were approaching Beverly Hills? When they started marching on the mansion classers, all of a sudden it was a problem. But when they were in suburbia and they were shining lasers in people's windows and yelling threats at their kids, or when they went to the ghetto to burn Wendy's, that's perfectly fine. It's a legit grievance and it's a mostly peaceful protest. You remember that? It's the same with the border crisis. The same people that say, oh, come all ye faithful, huddled masses, don't want them in their community. Martha's Vineyard, the greatest example of this. You remember that. That was one for DeSantis. That was hilarious. Musk is half correct. He's got the right idea, but only one of the right ideas. Part of these individuals are meant to become neoliberal voters. they will bow down before Joe Biden or whatever Democrats happen to be in office at the time. Oh, thank you, you snipped the shackles off, and now I can be an American and shit like that. It is meant to make a new voting class, but you don't need that many voters. You don't need 20, 30 million people now, do you? No, but you need lots of slaves. After all, look at Grassley and all these other morons. Who will pick the crops? Who's going to pick the crops to make Elizabeth Warren's wine? Who's going to work on her vineyard, clipping grapes? Who's going to harvest the apples? Who's going to pull the potatoes out of the ground for your next suburbanite middle-class meal? Who's going to harvest the lettuce? Oh my God. Who's going to harvest the arugula and the avocados for all the Starbucks food? Illegals, by and large. Migrant labor is responsible for most of the apple picking that goes on in Vermont, for example. You get a lot of apple orchards. Other than some home farms that are like pick your own, and you go there and you fill your bag and stuff, and they're tourist traps, by and large. People come from thousands of miles around just to pick fucking apples and look at the trees change color, which is... I never understood it because I'm like, hey, that time of year I'm thinking about warm weather and saying, maybe I should stop over in South Padre Island or something like that. That'd be fun. Texas does it better. It is like a mini paradise. Some of the people around that area don't want me to talk about it too much. They're afraid of even more tourism. I would point out spring break, that's I think the number 3 or 4 destination in the U.S., so I wouldn't worry. Tourism is what causes that island to thrive, although it's really the beaches and the warm water that you go there for in the end. That and the burgers. And the tacos. And, well, they got smoke shops and crazy shit like that. They had Amanita mushrooms, actually, for sale in one of those shops. I'm like, I didn't know that was legal in the state of Texas. They also had something that was like, I don't know, it was some sort of cannabis product, and it's definitely not legal down there. I don't even know what it was. It probably smells like weed, but it isn't weed, or something like that. Border crisis is intentional, but part of it's to supply slave labor. To drive down the cost of certain goods that Americans don't want to pay more for, number one, and number two, don't want to do themselves. The average American doesn't want to work 12 hours a day out in the hot sun to build a brick wall. But they will hire illegals to do it, and they'll be willing to do it for less than minimum wage. The average American does not want to pick lettuce for a living. But illegals who came into the country are more than willing to do so. Migrant labor, they call it. Well, without E-Verify, you don't really know whether they're an asylum seeker, an economic migrant with papers, or whether they were hired sight unseen and they happen to wander across the Rio Grande at some point. You need millions of these people to compensate for work that Americans genuinely, in many cases, honestly would not want to do. Backbreaking labor and shit like that. Hell, if illegals weren't being hired in the United States, and why do we keep finding that, like, skyscrapers and shit, part of the construction was done by crews from either Mexico or Eastern Europe that were here quasi-legally, if that? Well, we hear cases like this on a constant basis. Construction work, picking vegetables and fruits and shit, doing landscaping and manual labor, certain serving jobs. For example, person wants to hire a gardener or a maid or something like that. Well, there's not necessarily, it's a more informal under-the-table work. There's not necessarily a check going on. And so if you're paying slightly over minimum wage, which would be half of what you would generally pay to someone for doing like live-in maid services or something like that, or for a cook or something, and then you probably get really good food, by the way, it makes sense to hire the illegal. Now, doesn't it? Economically, there's an impetus to do so. The upper middle class really loves to do this. Also, then they get to parade them around and refer to them as the help among their lily white fan base, their friends circle. Oh yeah, that's just the help. Yes, that's Enrico, or that's Paulina, my maid, and this is Enrico, the landscaper. Ha ha ha. Look at how cool I am. I'm hiring illegal immigrants. Stuff like that. Working for tips under the table. It's horseshit. But Elon Musk is right. It's just there's another dimension to it that he didn't get to. That's about all. Peace out.